and everybody's got their maps, okay? Some of you brought yours from Nolensville, which is pretty darn impressive, I gotta say, that you actually hung on to them. So what we've got is the Union Army of the Cumberland, about 43,000 men strong. They start out up in Nashville, up in the upper left-hand corner of your map. The Confederate Army of Tennessee, about 38,000 men strong, although there is a large concentration of those soldiers in Murfreesboro. They're actually spread out a fair bit. They've got sizable portions of the army back to the west and north in Reedyville. They have them down in Triune, because as we discussed yesterday, if you have an army that's 38,000 men strong, you probably also have in the vicinity of some 20,000 horses and mules that have to pull wagons and cannons and ambulances and everything else like that. Okay? So, if you keep all those horses and mules together and they just start going out in the grassy areas, about a week later, all your horses are starting to starve to death. You've got to spread your army out. If you're not bringing in fodder and food for the horses like the Union Army is in Nashville, bringing them down the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, and when they're able to on the river, the Cumberland River, they're bringing most of their forage with them. The Confederates, though, are relying mostly from what's on the ground and what they can get from the local area. But Bragg is, also the reason Bragg is spread out is he's also feeding his army off of the agricultural produce that has come in from the harvest of 1862. He's essentially sitting on and protecting his supply base. Good, he brought his map with him. So, now the reason Bragg has chosen Murfreesboro as a central point is, of course, that sits, and you can look on the map and see Murfreesboro down there in the bottom right. I mean, look at all them roads that come together in Murfreesboro, plus the railroad passes through it that runs between Nashville and Chattanooga. Bragg, contrary to popular opinion, is actually not a complete moron, and he knows that Chattanooga is the next goal of the Union Army that sits in Nashville under General William S. Rosecrans. So if he sits astride the railroad with this great road network that he has here, all he pretty much has to do is wait for old Rosie to move his army, figure out which direction he's going. Probably will be coming straight at Murfreesboro, but if he's not, he can use that road network to pounce on him any which way and defend that vital railroad junction behind him at Chattanooga. And indeed, Rosecrans' main goal is to seize the city of Chattanooga. But he has more on his plate than just what's on the military thing, because if it's just from a military standpoint, I figure Rosecrans is planning on an April or May campaign. And although we have very good weather today and yesterday, I'm sure you've all checked the forecast out, come the end of this week, we will all be wishing that they had indeed fought in April or May. Because it's going to get, start to get rainier and colder and ickier as the week goes on. But that is indeed the conditions that the soldiers fought in. So we'll be, sort of presenting that to you folks when we get into our living history stuff. Rosecrans is not going to be allowed to wait, because President Abraham Lincoln is not only pushing Rosecrans, but in fact pushes all of his major army commanders to go out and seek a fight with the enemy sometime before the end of December 1862. And in fact, December is a pretty busy month in the Civil War. You've got big battles at Fredericksburg, Virginia, Chickasaw Bayou, down near Vicksburg, and the Battle of Stones River. All three major armies of the Union will engage in a fight before the end of December, and two of those armies will lose spectacularly. Lincoln is, of course, seeking a victory. One, to bolster Northern morale, get the Union war effort back on track, and also to support his Emancipation Proclamation, which is scheduled to go into effect January 1st, 1863 at midnight. And begin the process. Lincoln is already looking out ahead of that document of literally changing what this war is all about. When this gets started, this war is, for Lincoln and the administration, about preserving the Union, more or less holding things the way they were. That is no longer the case. Lincoln is now looking down the line and sees the only way this can truly be a victory for the entire United States of America is if we make some changes coming out the other side, not the least of which is the destruction of the institution of slavery once and for all. And so that is on the plate. But without success to back it up, Lincoln's not sure where this whole process is going. So Rosecrans will move out of Nashville on December 26, yesterday, 153 years ago, 1862. His army is split into 3 wings or corps, about evenly divided, 14, 15,000 men apiece. And they will advance, as you can see on the map, along 3 different routes. Why? Because since Bragg has his army spread out, he's got reports coming in that, oh yeah, there's a bunch of Rebs down at Triune, there's a bunch of guys over at Murfreesboro, there's a bunch of guys over here. He frankly doesn't know if one of them is just a sizable camp and then over here is the main army, because this cavalry, frankly, is not doing a very good job of penetrating the shield provided by Joe Wheeler and the Confederate cavalry to get really good, detailed information. So what you're seeing here is essentially a military version of Blind Man's Bluff. You send out all 3 of your units going down different roads, and you're doing this. And when you touch something, you hope it's not so big that it'll chop that part of your army off. So it's a pretty dangerous thing to do. Yesterday we were at Nolensville, following the route of McCook's right wing of the Union Army. They traveled down the Nolensville Pike, down to that town, had a fair bit of fighting there, but were able to eventually push the resistance of the Confederate cavalry under General John Morton from the town, and then a few miles south engaged them and finally pushed them out of a very strong defensive position at Knob Gap, just south of Nolensville. Did you lose the map? Oh, run. Good luck with that. Now hold on to that one better. Can't believe you just littered in the middle of a National Park Service program. On this day, 153 years ago, McCook's wing will continue its advance down, as you see the blue lines, they head down towards Triune, Tennessee. McCook's main job is to determine the veracity of those reports of at least a portion of the Confederate Army being down at Triune. Now, for a while, about half of the Confederate Army had been there, Hardee's entire corps. But by the time the campaign begins, all but a few brigades of Patrick Cleburne's division have already started sort of making their way back towards Murfreesboro. Apparently Bragg has the sense that something might be happening because of the information his cavalry has been providing him. That indeed the Union Army has sort of massed itself on one side of the Cumberland River for most of the fall. They had been encamped on both sides. Now they're all on the side that's facing Murfreesboro. That gets you to kind of think, why did they move everybody over on one side? It's got to be pretty uncomfortable. They must be fixing the move. So he's kind of beginning the process of bringing his army together. So when McCook gets down to Triune, he finds a bunch of abandoned campsites, maybe a few smoldering campfires left over from Wharton's cavalry, who are continuing to try to resist the advance of the lead elements of McCook's columns, but nothing really to report. And so he will report that to General Rosecrans on this day 153 years ago. Meanwhile, on the other side, General Crittenden and his left wing had started out from Nashville on the 26th. They moved down the Nashville Pike, which is the current day Old Nashville Highway. And those of you that traveled out with me from the park, we actually traveled on the Old Nashville Highway, that route, heading back this way. Crittenden starts the day on the outskirts of Laverne. But when the day dawns, nobody can see more than about 3 inches in front of their face, because it's foggy, because a cold front is moving in. It was kind of a, probably an upper 40s, low 50s day on the 26th, but it was pouring down rain. Now all that wet is on the ground, there's still some moisture in the air, and colder air is starting to move in, and boom, everything turns to fog. That takes a couple hours to burn off enough to actually be able to see just far enough down the road that you feel comfortable moving your men forward into what could potentially be an ambush as you move into the town of Laverne. Just as they start getting everything to go, though, then all of a sudden, plink, 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 plink on the ground, here comes sleet. Now everything turns icy. So now you have to wait for the sleet storm to get done, because of that, and also apparently it comes down pretty torrentially, so it's very difficult to see. It's starting to wet down the road. Now luckily for Crittenden and his men, their main road is the Nashville Pike. That is a macadamized road. So most of the water is just running off the top of it. All the rest of the Army, though, is dealing with dirt roads, which by now already, with heavy rains on the 26th, now this sleet coming this day, are turning into complete and utter quagmires. We actually do have accounts of soldiers sinking up to their knees in the mud in the middle of the road. And cannons, as heavy as they are, weighing more than 1.5 tons, plus all them horses pulling them, are literally having to be dragged now almost like a canoe through rivers of mud. It's that bad. His brigade of cavalry to try to slow down the Union advance on this road, on this route, and also at the same time trying to act as commander of all the cavalry in the Army of Tennessee, which is a really hard thing to do. Both be a combat commander and an overall chief of cavalry, which frankly Wheeler has a real hard time doing that. He does a pretty decent job as a brigade commander, and I would have to argue that he does a pretty miserable job as the chief of cavalry, because you really can't do both. You shouldn't ask somebody to do both. He has decided on the night of the 26th to withdraw his cavalry from Laverne, and because he knows that the big impediment that he's got behind him is Stewarts Creek. Stewarts Creek is an interesting, it's not a very, we'll get down there, it's not a very wide river. It's literally a creek. I mean, Stones River should probably be named a river. It really is a creek too. But it's wide enough that you can't just jump across it. It's got pretty steep banking along the sides of it, which makes it kind of difficult for for men on horseback or rolling vehicles to get to it. And it doesn't have a lot of good low spots in it where you call fords, where you could just it's shallow enough and stable enough that you could actually move more than a man walking or kind of wading across the creek across it. So the bridges are the key. And Wheeler realizes if he can hold the bridge, that now when you guys were driving behind me, when we took that right-hand turn to get on Nissan Boulevard, if you just had gone about 100 yards farther, you would have crossed the bridge. That's the bridge across Stewarts Creek on the Old Nashville Highway, on the Nashville Pike. The other bridge that Wheeler is concerned about is the Jefferson Pike Bridge right there. Now, not that bridge per se. Jefferson Pike was in 1862. But it was another route. People around here, passing through this area had known for a long time, if you're heading between Nashville and through between Murfreesboro and Nashville, that the Jefferson Pike was actually a viable alternative route, particularly if you were a cheapskate. Because the Nashville Pike was a toll road. Turnpike. They put a big wooden stick across the road, and they didn't turn it out of the way until you paid them for going through. Now, we use the word pike for road all the time, and not every, Jefferson Pike was not, in fact, a toll road. And as early as the Trail of Tears, which this wayside here talks about, parties of military men bringing Cherokee from their homelands in North Carolina and Tennessee out to Oklahoma, what was then called the Indian Territories, would bypass, after leaving Murfreesboro, the Nashville Pike and bring their bands through the Jefferson Pike so they could skip the toll. I find that kind of interesting to think about. I mean, for God's sakes, you're already taking their land, moving them to God-forsaken Oklahoma, and I'm sorry if anybody's from Oklahoma, but geez, okay? And you can't spring for the toll? Come on! So it's been, people knew around here that for a long time that this was a viable way around. And so if he can hold those bridges, or if he can't hold them, if he has to fall back, burn them and destroy them, he will trap the Union Army on this side of Stewarts Creek until they can rebuild those bridges, because there really is no other good way to cross. In fact, General William S. Rosecrans is concerned that, in fact, when he crosses, because of how hard it will be to cross, and because he can only cross in a couple of places, that, in fact, this may be where he meets the bulk of General Braxton Bragg's army, that as he's trying to make those little crossings across those couple of ways, Bragg will be there waiting and pounce on top of them. Why does he think that? Well, he's been reading reports and accounts of what's been happening along the Rapidan and the Rappahannock for the last couple of years, where the Army of the Potomac can only cross at a couple of places across the Potomac River, the Rapidan and the Rappahannock, and guess who's sitting there waiting for him every single time? Robert E. Lee, winning victory after victory after victory. Let's take a walk down and get a little bit closer to the bridge. Well, General Crittenden also realizes the importance of the Stewarts Creek bridges. The Union Army has been in this area, well, they actually have been in the Nashville area and had occupied most of Middle Tennessee since March of 1862. They'll lose some of that ground because of the Kentucky campaign. That withdraws all the Union forces out of Middle Tennessee in pursuit of Bragg up into Kentucky. And when the entire campaign is over, Bragg is sort of able to hit the reset button, regather up the area from Murfreesboro back to Chattanooga for the Confederacy. But in the time the Union had spent here, they had a bit of time to sort of reconnoiter the ground and get an idea. So Crittenden is fairly conversant, maybe not from himself, but because of other officers in his command who had been part of the garrison down here. He understands that as he moves forward from Laverne, the real key is going to be able to seize the bridges. And he decides, instead of just moving forward with his entire force slowly but surely, and a group of 15,000, 16,000 men in column with their artillery is going to take a long time to get somewhere, even on a paved road. Then instead what he does is he assembles two strike forces to move more nimbly. He details Colonel Charles Harker to take his infantry brigade with its supporting battery of artillery and a couple companies of cavalry to attack and take the bridge across Stewarts Creek on the Nashville Pike. The assignment for taking the Jefferson Pike Bridge, because Crittenden wants both of these things, because if he has two routes that he can use to cross men and material across the river, so much the better. That'll speed things up for him if he needs to really kick it into high gear to head towards the Murfreesboro. So he assigns the task for this bridge to Colonel William B. Hazen and his brigade of infantry, an Ohio battery supporting it, Battery B of the 1st Ohio Light Artillery, and 4 companies of the 4th Michigan Cavalry. The infantry in Colonel Hazen's brigade are his own 41st Ohio, as well as the 110th Illinois, the 6th Kentucky, and the 9th Indiana. What Hazen decides to do, and this is pretty similar to what happens at the Stewarts Creek Bridge on the Nashville Pike, of those groups of men, who moves the fastest? The cavalry does, but they're pretty small. Captain Frank Mix, who is commanding the 4 companies of the 4th Michigan Cavalry, has at his command about 90 effective souls. That's on horseback. If they ever have to dismount and start fighting, as I told you guys back in Nolensville, what happens? 1/4 of those men will not be firing their guns, because the men and the cavalry work in sets of 4. When it comes time to dismount, 3 men dismount, hand the reins of their horses to the 4th man who remains mounted, and he keeps those horses far enough behind not to get shot, and hopefully keeps them from running away. Although, you know what, I don't want that job. I don't want 3 scared horses, plus my own, to manage in the middle of a firefight. But also close enough so that if we have to get back in the saddle and move and use our mobility to our advantage, we can do so. So he may have 90 men riding into this mess, but in the end, he may only have about 70 or so, 70 or so that will actually be part of the fighting when it reaches that point here at the bridge. So what Hazen tells Captain Mix is, you ride forward. You drive, you fight, give me information, tell me what's going on, but also if you see the opportunity, you seize that bridge. By God, do not let them burn that bridge down. As soon as I hear from you, I'm going to have my men moving at a pretty normal pace. You can tire out your infantry really fast. And although the distance is not that great from the Nashville Pike to this position, I mean, if you had your infantry starting at double quick time, by the time they got about halfway here, most of them would be huffing and puffing. Remember, they're all carrying their packs and stuff now. This is not like being in a battle where we know we're going to get in a fight. We drop all of our heavy stuff and just wear the stuff we need to fight with. We're carrying everything we own in the world right now. So these guys will be carrying in excess of 100 pounds on their backs and then with their muskets and cartridge boxes full as they go into this fight. You cannot have them start out at a dead run. He's just going to have them move and move at a decent pace, and when he hears from mix, he's going to start moving them forward. The battery is going to stay with the infantry, but as soon as they hear it, they'll put their horses to the gallop, and as best they can through the mud and the muck and the mire, they will come up to support Mix once he makes contact. Well, instead of me telling you the story of what happens here, Captain Mix, and this is a rare thing for a captain to actually have a report in the official records, but because this action was so important, Captain Mix sat down and wrote his own report just about what happened here at the Jefferson Pike Bridge, and it made it into the compilation of reports. So along with, General Stanley and, all the men that we talk about when we talk about the high command of the cavalry, this young captain commanding 90 souls gets to have his own report. And so I figured, why not just share it with y'all? So he writes, in compliance with your order on December 27, 1862, I reported to General Palmer with 4 companies of the 4th Michigan Cavalry, companies H, E, L, and B. I was ordered to take the advance of a brigade of infantry and 1 battery of artillery and move off on the Jefferson Pike to take and hold the bridge over Stewarts Creek, about 4 miles east of Murfreesboro. I sent Company E into the woods to the left of the road as skirmishers and Company H to the right. When about 1.5 miles out on the road, our advance came upon their pickets. I immediately started with Companies L and B after them. We were then 2.5 miles from the bridge. At every rod, their number increased so that when we came to the bridge, we were chasing about 200 men. Captain Pritchard with Company L had the advance and was so close to them that when he crossed the bridge, some of them were pushed off the side of the bridge and were taken prisoner. As soon as we got possession of the bridge, I sent couriers back to hurry up the infantry. While we were waiting, they attacked us in strong force, but our boys nobly stood their ground and repulsed them. We heard no report from the infantry. I sent another courier back, and he soon came back to me saying there were about 100 of them in our rear between the infantry and my command. He's talking about the Confederates now. They're hearing gunfire, and the Confederates have indeed crossed the river and are trying to outflank them from the rear. I attempted to draw part of my command, Company L, back to the bridge, but I no sooner started them back that they came down on us like bees, yelling as if they had us for sure. I had Company B under Lieutenant Connor posted on each side of the road where they had good sight of them. Company L came back to the bridge on the double quick, and with the enemy close at their heels, I ordered them to right about, which they did handsomely, not a man flinching or wavering in the least. They immediately opened fire upon the enemy, which soon made them leave for the woods. I soon heard firing in my rear and sent Captain Pritchard with his company back to find out the cause. As I instantly expected an attack from that quarter, I called Company B in and placed them on the bridge. They again attempted to drive us from the bridge, but our boys were too much for them, and again drove them back under cover of the woods. Lieutenant Leach now came in with Company H. He had run on the party from our rear, and with about 20 men, drove them to the woods and joined my command. The artillery soon came up, and my trouble was over. And as soon as Battery B of the 1st Ohio Light Artillery came up, this kind of, for those of you who are in Nolensville, what ended the fight at Nolensville? cannons coming up, or the artillery coming up. Well, in this case, the Confederates, which are basically the 52nd Alabama Partisan Rangers. I know that's a mouthful, but they were part of Wheeler's command. They weren't actually quite 200 men. They were actually closer to about 150. Their assignment was here at the Jefferson Pike Bridge. Joe Wheeler did not provide for them any additional infantry or artillery support. He figured the main thrust, rightfully so, was going to be on the Nashville Pike, or the Murfreesboro Pike. So he just kind of wanted some guys out here to sort of let him know what was happening. Well, they did, but it happened so darn fast, like you can imagine. You know, the guys see, you know, they start to engage in a firefight. Mix brings in one company after the next, so it seems like they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, even though they are only about 90 men. He routs the force that's on this side of the river, which is probably only maybe up to about 100, maybe less. And then when he orders the charge, he literally just starts knocking them off the bridge. Some of the Confederates did have torches in their hands. Their orders were indeed to burn this bridge. Now, would they have been able to? After 3 solid days of rain and sleet, probably not. In fact, later on in the campaign, the Confederates will try to burn down bridges and other structures on the battlefield proper, and they will fail to do so because everything is too darn wet. Company L gets on the other side of the river, continues pursuing. They absorb a countercharge, several in fact, as the Rangers reorganize and throw themselves back at them and back at them again. Wheeler tries to gather up more forces to bring them up here to try to retake the bridge, but by the time he's able to get anybody else in this vicinity, 6 Union cannons sit commanding the bridge area, and there's no way they can get very close because they don't have cannons of their own. When you're outgunned like that, you're done. As the daylight begins to fade, all of Hazen's infantry will move up. They will move across the bridge. They will establish a bridgehead with one regiment of infantry on that side, the other 3 backing them up on this side. Their artillery is here, and Crittenden will detail another brigade of infantry and their artillery to begin moving up the road behind Hazen. So essentially you'll have 2 brigades of infantry holding this bridge by dawn on December 28, 1862. A very similar story has played out down along the Nashville Pike. And so the Union, by the end of the day, on December 27th, 1862, this is a lot of good news pouring into General Rosecrans. He's got his crossings. It is apparent that the enemy is not mustered in force at Stewarts Creek. There has been no indications of any large masses of infantry or any masses of artillery. So the Confederate Army is apparently either still in Murfreesboro, and now Rosecrans is beginning to think maybe they're just planning on retreating. She can go through, it's okay. Oh, look at that. Oh, you know her. Okay. So Rosecrans has got that to chew on. He gets the message from McCook. No Confederates are in Trot. In fact, the cavalry that is now arrived and is supporting McCook tells him that they see infantry brigades marching away back towards Murfreesboro. Those will be the brigades of Patrick Claiborne, who have evacuated Tryon the evening before and are indeed heading back towards town. So here's another. Now Rosecrans is also okay. So they gave up Tryon essentially without a fight. Yes, John Morton and his cavalry did yeoman work over the last 2 days to slow down. But, anybody who's been trained like Rosecrans was at West Point, and so was Bragg, knows, if the enemy is just throwing cavalry out in front of you, he doesn't mean to stop you. He means to slow you down. So again, it starts churning in his head. What is Bragg thinking? Is he trying to mass somewhere to get me? Or is he indeed thinking of giving up the town of Murfreesboro and falling back to Chattanooga? And that little light begins to glimmer in Rosecrans' head. That will be very important when we get to what happens a couple days from now on December 29th, 1862. There's also a bit of worry, though, that creeps into Rosecrans' head. Look at your maps. So, you see the town of Smyrna kind of right here in the middle. Crittenden is coming down the Nashville Pike. That little squiggly line that you see running by Smyrna and Stewartsboro is Stewarts Creek. He has seized there at Stewartsboro the Nashville Pike Bridge. Up here on the Jefferson Pike, the road that leads to Jefferson, he has seized the other bridge. So that's where Crittenden basically is, between Laverne and Smyrna. McCook is way down here at Triune. Look how far apart they are from each other. Now you guys were with me at Nolensville. What did I tell you what was Thomas's job? Remember, he came down to Franklin, towards Franklin. Once it was determined the Confederates were not enforced at Franklin, though, he turned, was supposed to pass through Nolensville, use the road that connects Nolensville to Stewartsboro, and kind of place himself in the middle to be equidistant from either Crittenden or McCook, so that he could support them, because what Rosecrans is worried about is having one small portion of his army run into the entire Confederate army. Well, now he's got Crittenden way up here, McCook way down here, and where do you think our boy Thomas is? Now you see Thomas's name with the arrow right in the middle of that road, but guess what? He ain't there yet. What did I tell y'all in Nolensville? How was December 26th for old George Thomas? It was rainy, and the roads he was on are probably the worst going. He has to actually force march one of his divisions all night long on the 26th to arrive at Nolensville to back up McCook on midnight, December 27th. Well, they're played out. The remainder of his force is still strung out so that some of his men have not yet left the outskirts of Nashville. That's the 26th. By the 27th, when he is supposed to be somewhere along this road where his name appears, he is in fact still pretty much massing at Nolensville, which puts him pretty far away from McCook and way too far away from General Crittenden. And Rosecrans is beginning to get the sense, now that he knows that Triune has been abandoned, so there's nothing in front of McCook. Where does he figure if he's going to get into a fight with the Confederates, he's going to get into it? It's going to be Murfreesboro, which means if these boys continue on the route they're going, Thomas is not going to be able to come to help them on December 28th. You're General William S. Rosecrans. What are your orders to all of your army, all of your commanders on December 28th? What do you tell Crittenden to do? Hold. Crittenden will not do a thing. Nothing will change from what I have described to you here all day on December 28th. He will not advance a single another man or cannon across that river. McCook, he's still strung out between Nolensville and Triune. He will be told to hold the Triune, mass his corps there, and on the following day begin making a movement towards Murfreesboro, because we think that's where the Confederates will be if they decide to make a stand. And Thomas, hurry it up, boy. The only men of the Union Army that will be moving on December 28, 1862 will in fact be George Thomas's center wing, trying like heck to make up the lost time that they've lost because mainly of Mother Nature. They will not fire a single shot. They will not be faced by any battles or anything else like that, but they just have to fight the mud and the muck and the mire and try to catch up, because Rosecrans wants his army closer together once they finally make their advance on Murfreesboro on December 29th to either have a fight, or like I said, now what's boiling in the back of Rosecrans' mind is maybe a pursuit, because maybe Bragg is losing his nerve and he's going to give up the town of Murfreesboro. He really likes the idea of that. So that's what happened today, 153 years ago, some of which occurred right here on this spot. And I thank you all for coming out and joining me. If anybody has any questions, now's the time to ask them before we head our separate ways, or hopefully some of you will head back and catch some of the other programs back to the battlefield today.
Couple of questions. When Crittenden fell, was he holding this side of the...
Mostly this side of the river. He did not, no. He only sent one regiment of infantry across the river, set up his artillery to cover them. He certainly could have moved men across there very quickly if the enemy showed up in any amount of force. But honestly, if it's just cavalry, if he's got one regiment now of infantry across the stream with about 600-700 guys, Wheeler's entire cavalry brigade has no prayer of retaking that bridge. Oh, much smaller, yeah. I mean, you know, this covers a 4-lane highway with a turning lane. So, I mean, you know, Jefferson Pike was barely big enough for 2 wagons to pass one another in their road. So, I mean, you know.
Which one was more contested, the Old Nashville Highway or this one?
This one.
This one was more
contested. Yeah, the Partisan Rangers put up a hell of a fight. They did all those counter charges and even splashed about 30 guys across the stream. God love them.
Which end would that have been? That way, or?
They came across on the other side of the bridge about a mile that way, swung around, and that group that those 20 or so boys encountered in the rear, that was them. I mean, they were trying to do a little end around deal to maybe kind of fluster these guys on this side, and then, in fact, you know, you read it, they almost timed it perfectly. Mix hears the firing, and then starts calling his company back, and as they're coming back, the ones that are across the bridge, Company L, then the rest of the Partisan Rangers start charging the bridge from the other side. I mean, it was actually a pretty darn well-coordinated attack. And if Mix hadn't had his head in the game and sent one of his companies to go check out what's going on behind and call, as he was calling these guys back and got, you know, I don't know what to say. When he gives that order to turn to the right, as these guys are kind of pounding pell-mell towards the bridge, I mean, you got him. You can keep the pressure on. Somehow he manages to get them stopped, turn, and fire into the faces of the enemy and stall that attack from the front. I mean, there's a bit of luck involved here too. I mean, but the 4th Michigan Cavalry, we'll hear from these guys again. These guys were actually trained by Colonel Robert Minty, who is now risen to command part of, one of the brigades of cavalry in the newly restructured cavalry division that Rosecrans is putting together. Well, they'll be the 4th Michigan Cavalry that stands on Reed's Bridge the first day of the Battle of Chickamauga and keeps the Confederate Army from cutting the Union off from Chattanooga, allowing them to get into position and bring on the 2nd and the 3rd days of Chickamauga. One of the most critical fights of that battle. The guys who will stand tall in that are the 4th Michigan Cavalry. So it seems to me, if you look at the overall record of this group, even though Union cavalry as a general rule sucks at this stage of the war, there's no point in mincing words. There are some units that are better than others. Just so happened, luckily, or maybe not by luck, I mean, Stanley is the one that, Minty, told Minty to select somebody to go be part of Hazen's strike force. I think Minty probably knew, being the former colonel of the 4th Michigan Cavalry, exactly who to pick. A couple dozen. I mean, again, just like Nolensville. I mean, these fights, Company L, when they turn and fire, they're still on horseback when they're doing that. I mean, good luck hitting anything. But it does stall them. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you think you've got the enemy on the run, all of a sudden he turns and starts firing, then you got companies on either side who are dismounted, and they start firing. And the hoped-for rush from the rear that was well timed, but we know because of Frank's report, got stalled because he had the heads-up action of sending something back there to try to stop it. Wondering if indeed that's what the Confederates were up to, that he was able to, make the defense. I mean, he just made a great stand. I mean, some good decisions top to bottom. I mean, really didn't make a single mistake. The only thing you could almost term a mistake is when Company L went maybe a little too far from the bridge after their initial success. They probably should not have kept pushing. But you know what? When you got the enemy, I mean, Forrest said it, what do you do when you got the enemy on the run? You keep them on the run. You don't stop. I mean, if you got them scattered and you've been knocking them off the bridge, why in the heck would you stop?
What are they armed with? 4th Michigan?
Well, the Union forces are largely armed with breech-loading single-shot carbines, although some of them are still carrying muzzle-loading weapons. Rosecrans is in the middle of retooling his force, but quite a few of them have weapons that load from the back. And they're shorter, so they can be handled if need be from horseback, but still, both sides would rather shoot from the ground. The Confederate cavalry is still largely armed with either infantry-type weapons or shotguns. So once these guys get off the ground and start shooting their carbines, which are effective to almost a mile, well, not effective, but can't kill a man, but they're certainly effective out to 300-400 yards. A shotgun can hit a man from what? Here to there, to the sign. You got to get awful close. Under fire.
How many shots can you get off breech-loading?
A muzzle loader is about 3 shots a minute. A breech-loading single-shot weapon is about 5 to 7 rounds a minute. Still slower than a repeating or a semi-automatic weapon, but certainly it ups the ante.